Why does narrative work so well in VR?
I think narrative works really well in VR because, and this is some really cool studies being done in spatial memory, especially with applications in virtual reality, but spatial memory takes up such a larger portion of our brain and utilizes so many different sections like the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. And there's a reason that people use like mind palaces to remember details much more accurately. And it means that when we recall and we're reliving these memories of having played something in virtual reality, it hits us so much harder, so much more like a memory of a dream. I always say it's like a dream. And I think that's one of the big reasons, like the spatial element really hits so many more parts of our brain that we're just taking in so many more inputs. I think it's also, it's really easy to talk about being part of the story, like you're actually there and actually part of it. And I think there are interactive elements of storytelling in games that we are going to see put into VR in really interesting ways in the future, but I don't think we're quite there yet. I think we're still exploring narrative as a medium with virtual reality games. So I'm really excited to see what our industry comes up with in the next 5-6 years. I think it's going to be really mind-blowing.
I think narrative works so well in VR because of the way VR games actually immerses you in the world and makes you believe that you are present in the game. There are multiple senses triggered at the same time with voice or sound, and you can see things and you believe you can actually touch things. So when you're being told to do something or feel something, etc., or someone is trying to convince you about this and that inside a game, it makes for such a more comprehensive experience compared to flat screen, where basically one of your senses get triggered at a time. So VR is exclusive in that area, that it can actually make you believe and trick your mind that you are inside the game and that you have to follow the narrative or do as the narrative says.
Well, it works well because you're in the game. I mean, it's there. You can relate to it because you're there. You're in there, and sometimes you can see yourself, or you can see at least your hands or something, and you're doing stuff around you to make it happen. So it's easy to be a part of that universe when you are in that universe. I mean, if somebody's telling you the story from afar, or you're reading a book or something like that, you can kind of get that sense that you're there and things are happening. But when you're actually literally and physically making things happen in this video game, you're just so engrossed in the universe that's either around you or that you're building as part of this. That's why it works so well.
If you asked me a few years ago, I probably would have said something like, because VR puts you into the role of the main character. And while that is true, we've also been shown with games like Moss, Ghost Giant, The Curious Tale of the Stolen Pets, and many others that you don't need to be the main character or even be a character to get immersed in a VR narrative. So I personally think that a narrative works so well in VR because you are in the world the developers have created it. You're not looking at a flat screen, but you're watching things happen right before your eyes and being immersed in the world and characters as if you were them or were with them.
Because you are the character. When you're playing a game and the character's on the screen, that's one thing. And I know you could say that about first-person games, because VR is like that. But in virtuality, when you have your arms to move and stuff, and you're interacting with objects, and it feels like you're actually talking to characters sometimes, I would say that's what makes VR so powerful and so personal. Same as when you meet people in a VR space, when you meet them in Rec Room or VR chat and you're chatting to these people, it feels like a real event. So yeah, and when you combine that with a narrative-driven game, it can be quite intense, and very special.
Why does narrative work well in VR? I don't know that it's that simple. I don't know that narrative inherently works well in VR. I think there's a lot of challenges with narrative in VR. With narrative in VR, then some of the best narratives or some of the narratives that take advantage of the medium are the ones that really allow a lot of player agency. In a 2D story or a flat screen or a pancake or a traditional game story, then the game can take over with cutscenes and force your perspective and force your camera and show you what they want to show you, and they can tread you along these linear paths and tell the story they want to tell. But in VR, then there's so much room for the player to go off the path or go the wrong direction or look at the wrong thing in the wrong order and just totally mess up the flow of the story in some ways. And so I think that narrative in VR is so interesting because it's so challenging. Because you have to consider all these different things the player is going to be doing, all the things that they're going to see and hear and think about and want to do, where you didn't have that kind of agency in traditional games. You didn't need to worry about it in the same way. Certainly, looking at cutscenes and thinking about the way cutscenes work and forcing the player to experience a story beat, you can't really force a player to experience a story beat the same way. We saw this in the gallery when we were playtesting. People weren't even looking at it, because they're just looking off at this beautiful thing in the corner, or the shadow over here, or this light particle. They're just looking at other stuff, and they're not forced to experience your story or your vision. So as a kind of a long answer is the reason narrative is so interesting in VR is because of the player agency, because of what the player brings to the story, their perspective, their own emergent story. And that's part of why I think that silent protagonists or characters where the player is the character, experiences like that are really important, because they feed into that sensibility of VR and how to tell a story while still letting the player tell their own story.
I guess, look, that's the maze theory mantra, evolutionary storytelling, being inside the action, experiencing things in a way that you couldn't in any other medium. That's where we love VR and storytelling in VR. Whether that's with characters or with narrative or whatever, it's just so much more powerful.
But I think when I'm playing a flat screen game, at the moment I'm playing, for example, Death Stranding, a really, really good game, amazing production values. You really get to like the character that you're playing, when you're running along and you fall over and you think, oh, did I just hurt his knee? Better balance that rucksack a little bit better. So you do kind of feel for him. But in the end of the day, do I really know or care whether he's heading across the country to save his girlfriend or his wife or his sister? I know they told me earlier, but I can't really remember. Do I really read every little letter that I find or bits and pieces that I find in a flat screen game? I don't. I'm just kind of mechanically enjoying trying to get to the end of the game. But in VR, it's totally different. Ghost Giant, for example, Louis isn't just this character on a screen in front of you. He's a boy who's in a position that he shouldn't be in. It's not a nice position for him, and you are responsible for him. You're responsible for making sure that his life turns out better. The screen isn't in front of you with other distractions around you, your wife coming in through the door, something happening outside to distract you. You're in the world, and you care about the world, and you care about the characters. The first time I ever played Fisherman's Tale or Down the Rabbit Hole, for example, you're just in awe, looking around and looking up and down at this amazing worlds that have been created that you're now invited into. And I think that's why narrative works so well. You care more, or I personally care more, so I spend more time looking at the world and finding out the mechanics and the story of the world.
Over the years, storylines in video games have become so much deeper. So much in fact, that we even get trailers that are solely based on the story of a game. But now with the use of VR, you are actually the main character. You are the star of the show. It makes every twist and turn in a story so much more meaningful, as they are all being directed right at you. You're actually embodying these characters, rather than moving them around on a screen. No other form of entertainment can put you right in the centre of the story. VR can enhance so many elements in a game, and the storyline is certainly one of them for these reasons.
Why does narrative work so well in VR? I'm not quite sure, but I'm happy that it does. I think it just amplifies every single feeling that you usually experience on a 2D screen. Let's say now you get 3D audio, you're actually more immersed in it. You think, you have an actual feel of depth, how close things are, and I think it's a good thing that it's still working, but maybe there is some magic to it as well.